hope we get out of here. You in the shower sing.
This is Dystopia Now, a show where a comedian and an academic explore the philosophies and religions of Silicon Valley and the tech billionaires shaping our country, our world, and our future. I'm Kate Willett, and my co-host is Emil Torres.
That's when it suddenly hit me. Let's let the filthy billionaires all leave for Mars, 'cause we don't want them here.
Hello, and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I'm Kate Willett.
I'm Emil P. Torres.
And this is a dystopia now. We have been having there's quite a bit of bad news in the United States going on right now. I know some of you listeners are listening to us from all over the world. We've gotten emails from Spain and from the UK. Congratulations on not living in the United States. Maybe I think some bad things are happening in your country as well in some cases, but it's been crazy.
Yeah, it has. I mean, there's a reason we didn't title this podcast Dystopia in the Far Future.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening right now.
Yeah.
You know, actually, so an acquaintance of mine, Jason Stanley, who's a professor at Yale University.
I like a lot of Jason's work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So do I. He published a book a few years ago called "How Fascism Works," and he just moved to Canada explicitly because, as he put it in an interview, the U.S. is now tilting towards fascist dictatorship. So yeah, the news has been absolutely brutal. It's a relentless onslaught.
The video is out of El Salvador where they're deporting some people. I mean, this is so upsetting that I'm kind of trying to get my words together. But basically, they have deported a bunch of people to this prison in El Salvador, more of a work camp, really. It's a prison, but also like a work camp and a torture camp. And these people have committed no crime. It was based on the fact that they had tattoos, which were associated with, they said, ICE was saying in the Trump administration, with this gang called Tren de Aragua. And apparently, that gang doesn't even have tattoos that are associated with it. They're just finding random people with tattoos, random men, and just putting them in El Salvador. And then ICE has actually admitted that they deported someone due to an administrative error, and now he's in this prison in El Salvador, and they're saying that they have no legal authority to get him back. It is just, it's horrible.
I think the instance that you're referencing there, I mean, it's just this guy who lived in Maryland. He came from El Salvador. There was a protection against sending him back to El Salvador because of a risk of gang violence targeting him. His wife, with whom he has a child, is a U.S. citizen. And this guy was just picked up. I mean, it's hard. I don't know. This is the sort of thing that makes it hard for me to sleep at night, thinking about some innocent guy who was, shipped off to a concentration camp. I cannot imagine the kind of psychological hell that this poor guy is in. But this is the US at this point.
I'm absolutely with you on that. It is so disgusting. I mean, I think one thing that makes everything feel particularly terrible at this moment, other than just everything that's going on, is that I don't think that the U.S. left, or even like the many liberals that resist this, have really developed any kind of political strategy yet to fight back on all this stuff. I mean, there are lawyers doing great work through the courts and lawyers who have been successful in some cases. Also, the Trump administration has shown that they're just willing to throw legal rulings in the garbage.
I can sort of feel mass discontent bubbling under the surface. There hasn't been a critical mass reached yet. There hasn't been an explosion of protests around the U.S. I feel like it's just a matter of time before there are just mass disruptions, society-wide social upheaval.
Yeah, especially as these tariffs begin to destroy the economy. I mean,
Yes.
I've been looking at, some of the things that they're saying about it, and they're like, oh, we're all willing to suffer pain, the economy is going to get bad for a while, but, people are going to go with us because they understand it's important in the long run. I don't think that's true. Like, people stopped voting for Biden because, for many reasons, but there's also just plenty of people who didn't want to vote for him because, the prices were up a little bit on eggs.
We've always had this very strong oligarchic, control by the few kind of element to our general system. Then in 2016, the U.S. was demoted to a flawed democracy. And I haven't seen, I'm not sure they've come out yet with the rankings of, this democracy index for this year, but I'd be surprised if we're still just a flawed democracy.
Yeah,
I think we've
I
probably
mean,
been
things have
demoted.
definitely changed. I think once you cross the threshold where like they're not obeying the courts anymore, that's a new level of not a democracy. I mean,
That is
like the rule of law is, I don't want to say it's totally gone because there's plenty of places where it still counts. I mean, like here for people that don't live in the United States, like there's a lot of things that are handled government wise at a city level. There's a lot of things that are handled by the state government. And then we have our federal government. And so a lot of aspects of our day-to-day lives are determined by decisions that are made at the state and local level. There's this horrible deportation stuff going on. And also like, in New York, like we just have a lot of really kind of regular corrupt liberals making most of the decisions on our day-to-day basis. So, depending on what country you're listening from, not sure how your countries have organized things. If you live in a blue state, you can feel somewhat insulated from a lot of the chaos of the Trump administration, particularly if you're not a person that listens to the news, which is most people. Most people are like wildly not knowing what's going on. And at a certain point, you can't blame them. But I think with what Trump is about to do to the economy with these tariffs and with, the recession that economists are predicting, if it ends up going down like that, it is going to start to become very noticeable. So I would expect there to start being a lot of popular backlash, particularly because he's fucking with people's Social Security. They're fucking with Medicaid and these programs that people really rely on. I think this is by far the worst that like Trump has ever been.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's this phrase that listeners may have come across, which is, you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. And so, there are situations where maybe it's not so obvious that politics cares about you. Like you're saying, Kate, I mean, people, a lot of the sorts of conditions in which people live are to a great, significant degree determined by more local politics, as opposed to, the U.S. federal government. But I think in situations, particularly in a situation where you have an aspiring authoritarian or autocratic leader who wants to be a king, who says before the election said he would be dictator on day one, then, I think politics from the top down relating to this kind of dictatorial figure, that is going to encroach upon people's lives more and more. So I don't know, it's a really scary situation from the collapse of our First Amendment rights, freedom of expression to journalism, to law. Trump has threatened a number of, I think, 5 major law firms, 2 of which have capitulated and said, okay, we'll stop doing what we're doing that you don't like, and we'll give you $100 million of pro bono work or something like that. So 2 have already caved.
I actually watched a video from Jason Stanley this morning where he was talking about what has been happening to the students that are being deported and these attacks on the student protesters. I've followed his work, but I haven't tracked everything that he's said over the past year and a half or so. But my sense is that he's been fairly quiet about some of the kind of fascist developments that were happening even under the Biden administration. And I watched his video from him this morning and he's like freaked out. He was just like, it was clearly something that had been mounting for quite some time. And I'm hoping that more people, even if they're not a scholar of fascism, that maybe have not felt like they needed to stand up yet are reaching that point. That's what I'm trying to hope for. I do want to tell you something funny, though, because it can't be all a bummer. Should we talk for a second about Elon Musk's baby mama?
Yes, absolutely. I think I know what you're going to say.
Okay, so
absolutely, go ahead.
So Ashley St. Clair, a woman that alleges that Elon is the father of her child, they've been having it out on X. Elon wrote, "I don't know if the child is mine or not, but I am not against finding out. No court order is needed. Despite not knowing for sure, I have given Ashley $2.5 million and I'm sending her $500K a year. And then Ashley St. Clair, who I think is like a right-wing influencer, celebrity, minor celebrity, she writes, Elon asked you to confirm paternity through a test before our child, who you named, was even born. You refused. And you weren't sending me money. You were sending support for your child that you thought was necessary until you withdrew most of it to maintain control and punish me for disobedience. But you're really only punishing your son. It's ironic that your last effort in court was to try to gag me. Well, you use a social media channel you literally own to distribute derogatory messages about me and our child to the entire world. It's about control with you, and everyone can see it. Everyone needs you to grow up, you petulant man-child. As I was reading that, I was like, oh, this is actually sad. Like, I don't, when I first read it, I was like, haha, man, she's owning him on public. It's so funny. She's calling him a man-child. But then I'm like, no, he's been horrible to this woman and their kid. And that's not as funny as I thought it was when I read it originally. But humor is in short supply now. So, yeah.
And I think this all started because, correct me if I'm wrong, she's selling her Tesla. And so that was what initiated this back and forth.
She's selling her Tesla, and that's why my God. Yeah. What a narcissistic little baby.
I agree. There are different gestalts from which to see the situation. One is it's just kind of funny that Musk's being called a petulant man-child, which he is. I mean, even Walter Isaacson described him as such in his massive biography of Elon Musk. But from a different gestalt, like it's tragic. I mean, these are, Ashley St. Clair is like a real person. I'm stating the obvious, but, I feel really bad for her.
I don't know if it's obvious. I mean, Elon, I could see him procreating with a robot, as we've talked about on the show, but this is not what's happening in this specific case.
Yeah, so I don't know. Also, I mean, speaking of Musk, Grimes has chimed in about him over the past few weeks. Then also like Vivian Wilson, Musk's daughter, she had this interview with Vanity Fair.
And Hassan, I was watching some of her interview with Hassan, and wow, she's sharp as a tack, and she really hates her dad. She's very young, but I'm hoping that she's going to go on to do great things.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched part of that interview too, and I'm really impressed with just the combination of knowledge about history, racism. She seems, for her age, at that level of education, she seems to be very, very knowledgeable. And that combined with empathy, And I've had this sort of theory that when you combine education and empathy, you're almost certainly going to end up with some kind of progressive worldview.
I think so. I mean, to me, I've been thinking a lot about wacko political beliefs. I'm a socialist, but I feel like in another society, I might not be a socialist. Like if things were just, working pretty well, I might be like, yeah, let's, give everyone the healthcare and let's make sure everyone has housing. But then after that, it's like, great that you have all this opportunity to make a lot of money if that's really important to you. And, let's do a little bit of Elizabeth Warren type capitalism. But our society has skewed so far in the direction of these tyrannical man-children billionaires that it's very difficult to imagine any sort of politics where you don't land on some form of the conclusion like, hey, these people have way too much power. And if, you want to rein that in through corruption, or you want to, as I do, let the workers have a lot more power, but just something where you're like, oh, God, this has gone terribly wrong.
Yeah. Also, it's worth noting that there have been some studies on the underlying causes of societal collapse. And looking historically through all these the past instances, there have been many civilizations that have collapsed on Easter Island, the Roman Empire, and so on and so on. You could sort of glean clues for what the underlying, or at least what enabling conditions there are for societal collapse. I mention this because one of the causes that has been identified by many people is sort of the obvious one. It's environmental or ecological collapse, right? But another one, a harbinger of societal collapse, is wealth inequality.
We got that going on.
So absolutely, our society, we are facing both of those. We have massive wealth inequality. Musk makes, I can't remember the number, but it's like millions of dollars an hour. People look it up. I might be off, by a digit or two. But the point is, it's more money than I'll probably make my entire lifetime. That's like what he makes in in an hour or a day. So yeah, the inequality, and then of course we're facing climate change and all of the ecological harms associated with that. Biodiversity loss. That's to global agriculture and so on. So in other words, I'm just saying that. So you wanted to bring a bit of levity with the story about Musk. I'm trying to bring us back to dystopia.
I mean, here's the thing. I think that most people in the United States are actually fairly comfortable.
Yeah.
And that is, in some sense, good as a person who wants everyone to have what they need, but it's in some sense a huge obstacle to a kind of more radical change that we would probably need at this point to get our country even back to the way it was a year ago, like just to even do something like get Social Security back to where it's going to be functional for people. I mean, it's going to take more than it's ever taken, but I think I'm feeling more optimistic about people rising to that challenge in one way or another because, I've been talking to these every once in a while I'll meet like a maybe 65 or 70-year-old person who I would, in my lens, just guess would be kind of an MSNBC watcher, somebody who maybe was a big fan of the Democratic Party. And I think that was kind of true about them, maybe even somewhat recently, but they're saying stuff like, yep, if there's a people's revolution, I'm joining the army. Like, I've had a good life. And I'm just like, and it's interesting because it is, I think, a lot of these, like it's people across the political spectrum and people even who are younger and older that are, I think, being quite radicalized by this moment, maybe not towards a super cohesive set of politics that, it's like, hey, I believe this one thing or this one theorist, but just like, this is really fucked up. I am ready to do something. Both parties have created the situation that put us here. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm fairly optimistic about the fact that a lot of people are not okay with this stuff. And one thing that has been kind of like, as we talked about on the show last week, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is just this ruling class attempt to kind of get us back to a sort of like neoliberalism. We were talking about it last week, this abundance agenda stuff, but the abundance tour continues, and it's literally so darkly funny to watch these two really rich white guys just go on literally every podcast, every news show, liberal, conservative, Nazi, all of them, everything, and just be like, it's not the right time to focus on oligarchy. We need to get back to the zoning. And I'm kind of like, this is kind of, it's amazing that the ruling class think that it's going to work, that they can just tell us to think about zoning instead. It's so funny.
Kate, here's a question for you, because I'm just not that sure. What are your feelings? Are you sympathetic to the abundance agenda?
No, I am not.
Anybody who's followed Kate on Twitter knows that this is something that really gets under your skin. And same here.
Yeah.
I think we're exactly on the same page about this. But it's just been almost kind of funny to see how galvanized you are, how pissed off you are about these, Ezra Klein and so on out there preaching their gospel of abundance, which is basically libertarianism as far as I could tell. Is that right?
Okay. They're trying to be secular gurus, I think, in kind of a Joe Rogan of the left kind of way. I can't, we talked about effective altruism last week, and I've done a lot of research, and I do have some kind of updates to this abundance agenda stuff after diving in that I think is related to our main topic for this episode, the neo-reactionary movement. So my broader thesis about what might be happening, and I can't quite prove it yet, but I'm looking for things, is I very much think that this is an effort in Silicon Valley to kind of reconcile the two factions. The pro-democracy, like, hey, let's just have, our same society with a little bit of improvements. And, like the guy who is the main funder of Abundance Initiatives, he's also the second largest donor to the Democratic Party. His name's Dustin Moskowitz, and he's an effective altruist. And then, on the other side, we've talked about these people like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen, the people that are more associated with neo-reactionary movements, and Balaji Srinivasan, who is a network state guy that we talked about in our episode with Gil Duran. And if you look at like the people who are in these abundance network think tanks, it's really people from both worlds. It's like a very normal, Vox lib kind of neoliberal type of person. But then, right next to them, there's a Foundation for American Innovation. And they are involved in the project to get freedom cities, Trump's freedom cities. So Trump wants to give away federal land to tech leaders for like these startup cities. And Steele and Andreessen and, other network state guys have had these in various places. There's a famous one called Prospera in Honduras. Patri Friedman, who is Milton Friedman's grandson, is one of the main people involved in that project, and they're doing crazy stuff there. They're like experimenting on humans in ways that are illegal in the United States. It's basically a libertarian cryptocurrency colony. And that same group, plus some other slightly more mainstream libertarian groups, are trying to bring freedom cities to the United States, which, like, who knows how much freedom they're going to have in the end. But certainly their goal is to do a very similar experiment here with like a completely deregulated, completely privatized charter city where like, they can build tall buildings, but that's the least of our fucking problems, right? Like the problem is that they don't want to participate in democracy and have people be citizens. They want people to be consumers, as is Curtis Yarvin's vision, where like the state, instead of, a government, is a corporation and you can kind of opt in or opt out. And the Abundance Project is really just a mix of people from both these worlds. And I get the sense that this is an effort from the two factions of Silicon Valley to kind of find common ground, and also maybe on the Dem side, the people who are not into Trump, didn't vote for Trump, that it might be a bid for some of these, people like Andreessen come back and, like on the surface, okay, yeah, it's good if someone doesn't support Trump, but like, what would it mean to have all of this fascist money thrown at Democrats? Like, how would that change the agenda, especially when some of these think tanks are openly saying like, hey, organized labor is way too much of a big problem in the Democratic Party. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a political project that I think could get really weird and dark. And also, as we talked about last week, there's a lot of fucking cultish weirdos that are involved in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right that the abundance agenda, this approach to thinking about what the future could and should look like, definitely has roots in the effective altruist community. Some of these communities and the ideologies that we've discussed before. I think it's really interesting. Your conjecture that it's an attempt ultimately to form a new coalition of individuals that overlaps to some degree with the people who are right now on the far right. Because it is appealing to their sort of technophilic, they're like pro-technology views. It's making similar kind of techno-utopian claims about how the development of advanced technology could enable us to create a world of abundance. I mean, also, I might have mentioned this on a previous podcast, but this idea of abundance, at least within sort of the transhumanist or TESCREAL movement, it goes back a long ways. There were extropians in the 80s who were making these grand proclamations about how we're on the verge of a fundamentally new epoch in human history in which there is radical abundance as a result of things like nanotechnology and AI. And yeah, I mean, I remember I did mention before, this idea of radical abundance, that is the title of a book about nanotechnology that was published by one of the leading
If you could
figures.
just print anything that you need. I mean,
yeah.
That's cool, right? Like that would be cool if the wealth were distributed equally.
Yeah.
And or not even, it wouldn't even have to be equal. If people just had what they needed, then fine, whatever. I like gadgets. It's fun to have cool technology, but it's just, there's something very disconcerting about the amount of libertarian money in this project, like Koch network money, Thiel money, Andreessen money, and I have to think that based on the vision that they have expressed so far, it's probably not a world that I would be into if these people get their way. I mean, I think that people like Ezra Klein, who's into UBI, and like, hey, that'd be great. I am a supporter. But we're sort of right at this moment where Silicon Valley has hyped themselves into the viewpoint that we are right on the verge of this world-changing AI boom that's just going to eliminate almost all the jobs. And, I'm inclined to think a lot of that is marketing hype, but it will eliminate some jobs. But they seem to have really convinced themselves that, human labor is about to become obsolete. That seems to be, to me, some of the motivation for why they've started to dive into some of these questions around who controls land and who controls cities, and what is the governance structure going to be. Bill has always cared about that shit, but I don't think that it was as much of a topic for just your run-of-the-mill tech bro in, I don't know, even 6 years ago.
Yeah. Here's sort of the way I think about the situation when it comes to claims of technology enabling us to produce radical abundance for everybody to have their needs satisfied. Libertarianism, which is what a lot of course, I'm stating the obvious, is what a lot of these tech leaders, tech billionaires are. Libertarianism leads to oligarchy, right? If there's no regulation, then you're going to end up in a situation through capitalist mechanisms whereby you have a small group of people who have the majority of the power. So these are there's a select few who have control over society, who own significant portions of the means of production and so on. Maybe, they will be altruistic, and they will ensure that there's an egalitarian distribution of resources. I'm really doubtful. So think about OpenAI, for example. This is a case I've mentioned on a number of different occasions. Their mission statement says that they're trying to build artificial general intelligence, or AGI, for the benefit of all of humanity. Okay, that sounds really good. Now, on the march to build AGI, they have constructed, they've designed, and then they've released various AI systems like ChatGPT. These AI systems are based on massive intellectual property theft, right? Which is directly harms writers, artists, and so on. There's worker exploitation. People in Kenya who are getting paid $1.32 an hour to basically get PTSD because they have to label the worst material that you could possibly find online. Things about suicide and murder and sexual violence and so on. There's the environmental impact and so on. So all of these harms that OpenAI has already caused in the world. And so if one believes OpenAI, when they say that they're developing AGI for the benefit of all humanity, you have to then think that having developed these sort of pre-AGI systems, certain widespread harms are okay. But once OpenAI, Sam Altman and the others build the most powerful technology in all of human history, according to them, suddenly then they're going to be overwhelmed with empathy, and they're going to make it available to everyone, and the entire human population is going to benefit.
It'll just be like the Grinch, where there's just a moment that their heart opens. They just look at the Who's in Whoville and just become soft towards us, come down from the mountain and celebrate Christmas among us.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I mention OpenAI is it's just an example of why I think a lot of the talk of abundance helping everyone is completely empty.
It's for sure empty. And if I'm going to give someone like Ezra Klein the benefit of the doubt, I would say that he probably, I'm thinking about the kind of person that becomes an effective altruist and hangs out, literally is kind of at the top of whatever the pyramid scheme is, hanging out with the literal billionaires. I think that their ideal society probably does include a social safety net, maybe even a somewhat robust social safety net. But there are people who are very poor even within that. And, there's the rich guys at the top. We have not changed any fundamental thing about the power structure. It's much more like kind of, the Rockefeller or Carnegie vision, where there's these, benevolent rich guys who are using their knowledge and now at this point in history, data to make choices about what would be the most beneficial thing for humanity. And his vision, Derek Thompson's vision, probably even Dustin Moskowitz's vision based on the things that he funds. It's not a brutal society. I would much rather live in a society designed by these people than a society designed by Peter Thiel. But there's a naivety to it, because if you don't actually give workers some power, we end up in the situation that we're in with someone like Elon Musk. It's a feature. It's not a bug. And then on the other side, some of the people that they're working with, I think they have a nickname for those people. They actually call it dark abundance, these kind of like hard right abundance people.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I've dug deep into the conversation that they're having within themselves. It's definitely like libs in conversation with fascists. That's kind of the reason why I hate it so much, because it's like, okay, I don't want Ezra Klein and a fascist who is paid by Peter Thiel to decide the future of my city. I want to have the people in the city get a say about it. I was listening to Ezra Klein's interview with this man named Tyler Cohen, who is close to Peter Thiel. He has
calls him a genius.
Yeah, but Tyler Cohen outlines his vision for governance not too long ago in a blog post. And what he called it was state capacity libertarianism. And this idea of state capacity libertarianism seems to be floating around these abundo circles. And basically, you're probably thinking libertarianism, state capacity, those things are at odds. That's not libertarianism anymore. And I would tend to agree. It's different than the anarcho-capitalist vision, because they imagine a strong state to protect capital, and even the state having a primary role of protecting capitalism. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're like, well, that's just the political economy of fascism. Correct, and I think in the Thiel verse and the Mark Andreessen verse, he also talks about this thing called dynamism, American dynamism, which I need to look at it more deeply, but it seems like it's abundance for weapons manufacturing for the most part is the this kind of short version of that summary. And Niskanen, which is the more kind of Matt Iglesias style think tank, I would say, like kind of center, but neoliberal, like self-consciously neoliberal. Like they have a fellow whose job is to do thinking on combining abundance with dynamism and stuff. So like they are trying, in my opinion, to sort of reconcile these two worldviews. But like someone like Thiel, what he believes cities should be, these freedom cities, it's truly so extreme. And for these people like Mark Andreessen, like Peter Thiel, who are really into Curtis Yarvin and the neo-reactionary movement, what do you think that their ideal form of government looks like? Is it fun and nice?
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I think so. I think I've come around to it.
Yeah. You're just going to become some weird dark abundance incel. I'm like, I don't know if I can do this podcast anymore. It's so scary.
By the way, just the term Freedom City, is it just me, or does that sound Orwellian? I don't know much about it, but the term itself just strikes me as like very Orwellian, like as if like somebody proposed it as a joke. Right?
Yeah, I mean, we have a long history of naming things after freedom, especially from Republicans. Like we had freedom fries during the George W. Bush era. There was freedom something else too, but Oh,
well, for a short while, the Iraq War was referred to as Operation Enduring Freedom, which has
and then Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Yeah. And enduring freedom is sort of funny because the term enduring could mean different things. One, it could mean like enduring like it's prolonged, but it could also mean like suffering through.
Yeah.
So I think they ultimately renamed it maybe because they realized that enduring freedom it might not sound that good.
I mean, to the right in the United States, and I think that this is kind of generally true. They're imagining freedom, freedom from taxation, freedom from, I was going to say freedom from, like a government being really up in their business, but a lot of them are not imagining that. They're imagining a government that just gets up in the business of like queer people and, but I think for somebody who is, let's say like more anarcho-capitalist, like they're imagining like a very small or possibly non-existent state that is like allowing them to do whatever they want. And then maybe like the more, kind of like Thiel conservatives at this point, like they're imagining a lot of freedom for business leaders to do whatever they want, but then also a lot of police to, enforce the plebes. But, somebody like on the left, like us, we're also envisioning like freedom from healthcare, freedom from health problems, like,
Yeah.
freedom from housing concerns and all of these like positive rights,
Yeah.
but they do not believe in that stuff. And, it's kind of each person for themselves when it comes to, the basic needs of life.
Yeah. And so I guess that does bring us back to like Curtis Yarvin and the Dark Enlightenment. It's a pretty brutal worldview as far as I can tell. Curtis Yarvin holds the view that democracy is a completely failed system. And what we need now is a kind of revolution, not mere reform. It's not that we can, wiggle some knobs, calibrate some gears within the machinery of our democratic system, but we need to get rid of it entirely and replace it with a monarchical system where rather than a king ruling through divine right or whatever, you have a CEO. And the CEO is not accountable to anyone except for maybe a board, just like it at in a corporation. So there's a board of individuals who can vote on whether or not the CEO remains in power or not. Curtis Yarvin, I think one of the few things that he says that is just right is that companies are little monarchies. This is not an insight original to him at all. In fact, one of the criticisms of his view, one of the more charitable critiques of his writings is that he does a lot of reinventing of the wheel. Here's a new idea. No, actually, people have been talking about this for forever. So it's this idea that corporations are basically little dictatorships, which I think is right. And if you sort of take a step back and reflect on that, it's kind of amazing that, politically we live in, I was mentioning before, now a flawed democracy, probably a failed democracy. But for at least most of our lifetimes, we lived in a full democracy. And yet, so many people spend 8+ hours every day living in these little dictatorships where you have to do what you're told. At any moment you could be fired, which could have serious implications for your well-being, and maybe it's really hard to get another job and so on. So there's all this pressure. It's extremely hierarchical and so on. But basically his claim is like, look, all of the awesome stuff we have around us is the result of companies. So that means these companies are effective at doing what it is they do. So let's design a governmental system that's exactly like these companies. And hence, we should all be living in a monarchy run by, a CEO of the United States, which to me sounds fucking terrible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Glad you agree.
Yeah, okay, so to me, being a democratic socialist, when you were talking, I was thinking about what that means to me. And that for me would mean more democracy, bringing democracy actually into the workplace. Like a lot of people, their association with socialism is Stalinism. And I think few people who are socialists in the United States are envisioning, a Stalinist system. Like I know for myself, it's much more about like, why do we have to live under a tyrannical structure for 8 hours a day? Especially, it seems like the worse your job is, the more low wage your job is, the more tyrannical your work structure is, like a lot of the time, and so like what do worker-owned co-ops look like? What does social housing look like? You get to vote on what's happening with your housing, with your neighbors, instead of a landlord, just determining it, and, finding ways that, we can actually redistribute some power back to the people. And it sounds like Yarvin really wants to do the opposite of that. It's like, oh, the people have too much power, it's holding back capitalism. As I'm saying this, I'm like, well, Ezra Klein believes a lighter version of that. The whole abundance thing is about like removing input processes from, like building or from just a wide variety of things in our society, but mostly building. And I don't think it's necessarily always terrible to do that. Certainly people do abuse those processes, but how much democracy do we want to have is an interesting question. I'd land on the side of a lot, and Curtis Yarvin would land on the side of none, and then maybe someone like Ezra Klein would be kind of in the middle of that.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Bernie Sanders is the one largely responsible for the term democratic socialism entering into our shared lexicon of terms that we use these these days. So I think he played a big part in just popularizing that idea.
Yeah, I mean, and he's the most famous democratic socialist for sure. Like DSA was started by this guy named Michael Harrington, and he had politics far to the right of what the average DSA member is today. I would say that his politics were much more along the line of like social democrat, which maybe Bernie's are also, like the socialist part was less important. But I mean, I would say that like Bernie has clearly read Marx, and the way that he talks about what's happening now is in, the language of like, it's the workers versus the ruling class. It's a very Marxist worldview. And, I think like thinking about different systems of government, I think why like Ezra Klein and those people are getting so much heat at this point is because they're like, no, it's not bad that we have an oligarchy like that, or maybe it's not so bad, whereas like we can see that we're going in a much more Curtis Yarvin type direction, and most of us do not like it, where like the democracy that we had under Obama, flawed as it was, unjust as it was some form of democracy, and like now it's becoming much more like just some random fucking guys get to decide what happens.
Yeah. I was mentioning before, like libertarianism leads to oligarchy, right? If you really have an unregulated free market, you're going to get concentration of power. I mean, this is why some people have argued that capitalism is kind of fundamentally incompatible with democracy. Capitalism is all about like a few individuals controlling the things that matter in society. Democracy is about distributing equal power, equal among every single person in a society. All of us get one vote. And capitalism is about hierarchy and difference, disparity, and so on. And the other thing, part of the reason I asked about democratic socialism, the term, is I think you're exactly right that it's unfortunate I think for probably good historical reasons, it's nonetheless unfortunate that a lot of people associate socialism and communism with authoritarianism.
It's not just, but it's not by accident. Like we have been heavily propagandized to think that, socialism is Stalinism,
Exactly.
I mean, like there's a lot of countries in Europe that, while not socialist, are more socialist than us, and it's like it's a much better life to have childcare available and your healthcare guaranteed, and I think it's just this really, I mean, there's just been a very, very concerted propaganda effort to like not show any of the sort of bad side of capitalism. I'll give you a very concrete example. I went to Cuba, and a lot of people in Cuba, especially the older people, they still have a very positive view of Fidel Castro. Not so much a lot of the younger people are kind of anti-socialism at this point because the U.S. has so succeeded in starving their economy that like the only people that are really able to take care of themselves are people who are somehow connected to this sort of separate economy of the capitalist tourist industry. It's complicated, but like, the older people remember what it was like before, and, U.S. control, and like the fact that, there was just a few guys in society that determined everything. And then Castro came, and like all of a sudden everybody had food, and everybody had, school and literacy and healthcare. And like, was it perfect? No. But like the trade-offs landed in such a way that I think most people, at that time, and even still the older people, agreed that, socialism was a better way to go than what was happening before. And in the U.S., it's just like, we just get this sort of like capitalism equals freedom and socialism equals tyranny. Like there's always a little freedom, and there's always some level of tyranny, but like the trade-offs are not represented.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about Cuba. It's not sufficiently appreciated in the U.S. just how much we devastated their economy. They had very little to work with. And they did end up, I'm forgetting off the top of my head some of the exact stats, but I mean, they had one of the like better healthcare systems. And also like Karl Marx himself would have been mortified by Stalinism. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, his vision, like he argued for a temporary dictatorship of the people, of the proletariat, in order to transition from a capitalist state to a communist state. That communist state was supposed to be deeply deeply democratic. In fact, he advocated for direct democracy. So there's no intermediary between the people and ultimately the policies that get implemented. So in other words, communism could have a democratic version. Marx's vision has never really been realized. There have been individuals who, during that sort of transition phase who have, been driven by autocratic impulses to take the role of a dictator, and then they've done terrible things. So yeah, I mean, it's just worth emphasizing that you could be a communist who is vociferously opposed to authoritarianism, right?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot this week about how far you can get in your life by just being a person who flatters rich people.
Yeah.
And that is certainly true of Ezra Klein, but it's also very, very true of Curtis Yarvin. And it seems like, he's this guy that is just kind of this fucking loser, sorry, but just a very unappealing, uncharismatic software engineer. And then he just starts writing all this stuff about how actually tech CEOs should be in charge of everything. And then boosted by Thiel and Andreessen, who are like, oh, this guy's really fucking on to something because they're narcissists and sociopaths.
Yeah, he's telling them exactly what they want to hear.
Yeah, and giving them kind of reminds me of long-termism, where it's like he's giving them moral justification for what they were going to do anyway.
Yeah, exactly. We mentioned before, long-termism tells the rich and powerful that you don't just have a moral excuse for ignoring the plight of the global poor, but you're a morally better person for focusing instead on things like space colonization or re-engineering humanity and enabling us to become immortal as individuals. So yeah, Curtis Yarvin seems to be playing a similar game, and it's worrisome the extent to which he's in the right place at the right moment. In just the right place, at just the right moment. And so his ideas have ended up having a certain appeal to, you mentioned Andreessen, J.D. Vance, and so on. It'll be interesting to see. So actually sort of bringing this full circle, be interesting to see, as you were mentioning earlier, what sort of cultural/intellectual shifts there are as the Trump taxes, by which I mean his tariffs, are implemented and the U.S. sort of plunges into a recession or maybe even a depression. I've seen one study out there that suggested that the GDP loss, if Trump's tariffs are fully enacted, would be twice as much as the loss during the Great Recession of 2008. That's pretty extreme. That's pretty dry. And so maybe a lot of the ideas floating around right now that are being embraced and promoted by some of these billionaires, including the sort of dark enlightenment, neo-reactionary movement, I wonder if there's going to be a backlash as the average person who doesn't care much about politics realizes that politics cares about them and is hurting them in their families in non-trivial ways.
I've been thinking about that Trump is kind of operating with two competing visions of the right. There's like the Steve Bannon vision, and then there's the Peter Thiel, Curtis Yarvin vision. And in the Steve Bannon vision, that is like very for these tariffs. It's like, we're going to bring back U.S. manufacturing, become energy independent, become a state that can produce enough weapons to beat China in a war that I really don't want to have, but he seems to want to. And maybe not a complete shutdown on immigration, but mostly a shutdown on immigration. And then to have enough natural resources within the United States where we don't really have to trade with other countries. I think that's like part of the plot to take over Greenland is, just the United States is kind of insular, and we're going back to the type of economy that we had in the post-World War II years. And Steve Bannon really doesn't like these tech guys at all because, first of all, I think there's just like these sort of concrete differences. They want a lot of high-skilled immigration. That is what they call it, high-skilled immigration. They mean engineers, but ever since we had that conversation about like their IQ fixation, I'm like, oh yeah, they mean eugenics. It's not just about, hey, we need like a data person and we can't find one. Like, let's see what's going on with, it's more sinister than just importing talent for a skill that it's hard to find, but they're like, to me, it seems like the more kind of like Yarvin faction, like Thiel, Andreessen, like it's crazy the extent to which like Yarvin's vision is sort of being implemented right now. Like he has this thing called RAGE, retire all government employees. And it sounds suspiciously like another acronym that is going on. And from what I understand, you probably know more about this than I do, but it's like he has this vision wherein like the United States is going to be destroyed, like the government itself, like through this attack on the civil service specifically. I think his parents were civil servants, so there's something going on there. But then, like a figure like Trump is going to ruin the United States, break down the government, and then it will allow the sort of actual leaders to emerge who are these like CEO monarchs. It's instead of like a giant country, it's like a little collection of sort of like independent nation states that are corporations. Am I getting it?
I think that's right. The key idea, as far as I can tell, is just that democracy should be replaced by a system in which there is a CEO monarch, right? And that is the best system, because after all, it's companies that are the most productive, that are changing the world in all the best ways. Again, all these appliances and objects that, computers that we have, these are developed by companies, and it's the best companies that survive, that able to efficiently manufacture these objects. And so let's model society as a whole. And so I think you're right that the idea is individuals would have freedom to move to some other CEO state. Right?
Yeah, that's your recourse, is that you could get the fuck out.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't like this CEO. I'll move to the neighboring states with their different CEO. But ultimately, the structure is hierarchical, and it's monarchical. It's dictatorial. So if you love democracy, you should be very alarmed by the fact that these individuals have gained such a huge audience.
So what is Curtis Yarvin's connection to the alt-right? And when I'm thinking alt-right, I'm thinking of the people that we started learning about a lot, 2017, like Milo Yiannopoulos, Richard Spencer, these sort of like actual Nazi people who want to create a white ethno-state. Where does he fall on that?
Yeah, good question. He's made plenty of remarks that are consistent with some of the extreme claims that alt-right individuals have made. Yarvin has suggested, we might have mentioned this in a previous podcast, that he sort of joked, well, kind of quote unquote, it's not entirely clear the extent to which he's being facetious, but he suggested that black people are genetically predisposed to slavery, right? And so like,
truly such a disgusting person.
Yeah, it's horrendous. By the way, years ago, when Milo Yiannopoulos was at his peak, I think it's his PR, or maybe it's just his agent, contacted me. And I was writing a lot at Salon at the time. And the agent said, Yiannopoulos would like to have a little debate with you. And so I was like, all right. I responded, it said, yes, I'm fine with that, as long as it's written and we can do a complete fact check of everything. And I never heard back. So I spooked them with my threat of fact checking, with legit citations and so on.
Yeah, there was this big profile on Curtis Yarvin in the New York Times a couple months ago, which is crazy that they're platforming. I don't know, like not platforming. It's not crazy to write about Curtis Yarvin. It's not even crazy to interview him, but this was a softball interview that kind of made it seem like, okay, well, this is just part of the mainstream now. Yeah. And I'm reading this thing that was in that article, that interview. This is the interviewer. There was reporting in 2017 by BuzzFeed. They published some emails between you and the right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos, where you talked about watching the 2016 election with Peter Thiel and referred to him as fully enlightened. What would fully enlightened have meant in this context? And then Yarvin says, fully enlightened for me means fully disenchanted. When a person who lives within the progressive bubble of the current year looks at the right or even the new right, what's hardest to see is that what's really shared is not a positive belief, but an absence of belief. We don't worship the same gods. We do not see the New York Times and Harvard as divinely inspired in any sense, or we do not see their procedures as ones that always lead to truth and wisdom. We do not think that the U.S. government works well. And it's like, okay, well, there's some statements in there that I would agree with. The U.S. government does not work well. Harvard is not, amazing. It's a very elitist institution, but there's just this nihilism that just seems to pervade this stuff that is just this real cynicism that is just, I find it sort of chilling.
Am I remembering correctly that in that same interview, if not, it would have been some other interview that has recently been published, Yarvin mentions that he saw Vance at a party, and Vance walked up to him and said, Yarvin, you reactionary fascist, and then chuckled.
I didn't see that.
Yarvin said that from his perspective, Vance, it wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. So, yeah, also, by the way, listening to you read Yarvin's words, it just foregrounds to me how Curtis Yarvin has a way of speaking that if you listen to him talk and you imagine yourself being one of these like far right, kind of like, kind of incel culture type people, there is the impression of a sort of profundity. Right? But if you actually listen to the words he uses, a lot of it's just so annoying, and it's so, I can't think of a better word than like amateurish. Like, I don't believe that Harvard is divinely inspired. Okay, like, yeah, nobody thinks Harvard is divinely inspired. Like,
Right. It's like it's a straw man. It's like,
yeah, and a weird way to put it. Like,
yeah, it's very strange. And I'm just wondering, I know we got to finish up soon, but I'm wondering, what is the connection between the neo-reactionary movement and like the test reel people? I'll give you an example. I actually saw, after the last episode, I found a picture of Curtis Yarvin with Hanania, and they were like, even though we argue in public, we actually agree. It probably wasn't exactly that, but it was something quite similar. And so to what extent is like Yarvin into the test reel stuff, or are his followers into it?
yeah, so I know that he got his start, I think we mentioned this before, basically on a blog by Robin Hanson called Overcoming Bias, which has been hugely influential in the development of the whole test reel movement. Dark enlightenment more generally, neo-reactionary movement, that traces its origin back to Less Wrong, right? Which is the rationalist community blogging website introduced by Eliezer Yudkowsky, who has direct extensive connections to every letter in the test reel acronym. And in fact, that one of the major figures in the neo-reactionary movement is a guy named Michael Anisimov. And Anisimov, so if you buy a copy or download a copy of Ray Kurzweil's 2005 book, The Singularity is Near, you will find Michael Anisimov quoted all over the place. Right. So this was before he came out as an anti-democracy, far-right, kind of, as far as I understand it, he's kind of like an ethno-nationalist neo-reaction person. He believes in monarchy. He thinks democracy was an enormous mistake that we've made as a civilization. So this is a guy that, like, I never met him, but I kind of had some communications now and then back in the day when he was just a prominent singularitarian who was giving talks at things like the Singularity Summit. But he ended up being this very important figure with respect to the emergence of the neo-reaction movement. And his roots go back to the transhumanist and test reel more generally movement. So there's also that kind of interesting connection. I mean, these ideas were in a certain respect, it's not surprising that neo-reaction and a kind of like viciously racist view emerged out of this neo-eugenics movement of test realism, right? Because there are a bunch of people who, are IQ realists. They think IQ is this very important metric that really does measure something that individuals have, this G factor. And it's just a small step from that to starting to make claims about racial groups having certain, IQs that are, on average higher than other racial groups.
And it seems like it's also making the sort of power structures that the test reel stuff is kind of implicitly advocating for very explicit, whereas if you're a long-termist, well, coincidentally, the best thing for the long term is to give Elon Musk all the money so that he can get us to space and so that we can have this space future. Whereas like Yarvin's like, no, that's definitely the best idea. Let's just have him rule everything, and kind of bringing it into the realm of, super political as well.
Yeah. And so I'd be really curious. Maybe we could try to research this for a future episode, the extent to which Elon Musk is aware of Curtis Yarvin. Because I've not read any interview with Elon Musk or seen any videos in which he references Yarvin. But he's obviously, he's rubbing elbows with J.D. Vance and Peter Taylor and so on. So I'm sure he's aware. I'd be really curious to know the extent to which Yarvin has influenced Musk's.
I mean, it seems like it has to be, because he's doing the 4-letter, he made a 4-letter acronym to get rid of the civil service, which is kind of like Yarvin's whole deal, So it's just like, I have to think that, if he wasn't a Yarvin fan, maybe he would have chosen 3 letters or 5 or something. But, I don't know. Yeah. I'm not sure.
I mean,
Anyway,
Doge is kind of enacting the policy recommendations of Rage.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Rage, yeah, exactly. So Doge is just kind of the practical entity. Rage is sort of the idea. We need to retire all government employees, and Doge is there actually doing it.
I mean, I would be shocked if Elon Musk did not, if he wasn't quite familiar with the ideas of Curtis Yarvin, because Elon is definitely hanging out on all of these, or at least at some point in his life has definitely hung out in all these like Silicon Valley blogs. And, you know, he's been close to people that are really into Curtis Yarvin. So, I mean, he's certainly encountered these ideas, and he seems to, he seems to be, you know, very into like pleasing like a troll audience.
It's the same basic audience.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, that I would say, like, that to me, like, all this stuff has in common is it's like for dudes who are like self-flattering sociopaths. Not to be too basic about it, but everything from like I would say that effective altruism is the mildest of all these things, because it's like, yeah, you could be a good person and, you know, into effective altruism, but there really is something so kind of repulsive about appointing yourself the individual that has the ability to like determine scientifically who should be helped, you know, like that it's that I mean, like, if you want to donate to a charity, like, great, you know, I give money to charities and organizations that I believe in, but that it's like this kind of mentality of like, I have definitely made the right choices. I have calculated mathematically where my money is the most useful. I am the arbiter of this. There's something really arrogant about it. And but it's also not that extreme. Yeah. Whereas like something like Yarvin is really so extreme, but it's all just for guys who think that they are the smartest people in the entire world, and that their private conversation about how society should be run is where it's going to get sorted out versus like among people. And I think that's why I hate the fucking abundance stuff too, is because it is just a bunch of fucking rich guys talking about what kind of world we should have.
Yeah. And they're almost all white as well.
Oh yeah.
It's a very homogenous group of people. And the hubris to be a white man, as I've heard some people say, the hubris to just, you know, be sitting amongst yourselves having a conversation about how we should design the future for everyone. You know, we're the ones who have special access to, you know, insights about what the future should look like. And now that we have acquired these insights, let's now impose this vision on everyone else. It is very hubristic. It is anti-democratic, at least in the sense that it is very elitist.
Before we do end the episode, I wanted to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. There's a lot of you at this point, so thank you so much. Joseph Stevenson, Bednars, Eddie Nico, Brianna Chang, AJ, Macerna, Matt, John Johnston, Remelt Ellen, Blaine, Stephanie Fagus, Vigard, Kayla, Molly, Casey Lau, Richard Horseman, Jacob Kukula, Phil Giles, In League, Simon, Megan Brokenberg, Christopher Graybill, Deirdre O, Mark Gordon, Juan Martinez, Dan Smith, Naomi Winter-Vincent, Adam, Michelle, Jason Morgado, What Eves, Carrie Lawrence, and Derek Lipkin. Thank you so much for making our show happen. And
we really appreciate it.
We do really appreciate it. We were almost able to hire an editor. So my super fingers crossed goal this week is that enough people will become Patreon supporters that we can get a third person on our little Dystopia Now team. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. We will be back next week. Dystopia Now is a co-production of Emil Torres and Kate Willett. Our theme song is Hunger Strike by Emil Torres. We have no outside funding or advertising, so if you can become a contributor on Patreon, we deeply appreciate your help keeping the show going. We are a brand new podcast, so please rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice, and we'd love your help getting the word out. Thank you so much.